There's a dangerous medical misinformation bill that was passed by the California legislature that's sitting on Gavin Newsom's desk awaiting his signature or veto. AB 2098 would allow state medical boards to punish physicians who spread quote unquote misinformation or disinformation regarding COVID-19, including false or misleading information regarding the nature and risks of the virus, its prevention and treatment, and the development, safety, and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines. Essentially, doctors would lose the right to speak freely and openly with their patients about the virus and its treatment options. Instead, the physician must go along with the government-sanctioned recommendations, which, let's be honest, are usually backed by big pharma and lobbyists, or risk losing their license. Now, many who have advocated for medical freedom are speaking out against this bill, including America's frontline doctors, Doctors in Medical Freedom, who are holding an event today at noon on the steps of California's Capitol building, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, and many others. But this bill is also getting the consternation from unlikely people like Dr. Lena Wen, who was fiercely pro-mandate during the height of the pandemic. She says California's anti-misinformation bill is well-intentioned, but it's a bad idea because each patient is different and doctors need to have the freedom to deviate from the course of action depending on the circumstances. For example, even though the government recommends a booster dose for anyone over 12, she says maybe a doctor would want to recommend waiting until the winter months or perhaps not recommend it at all for younger patients. She even mentions ivermectin, a treatment she is against, and says she has a physician friend who preferred to prescribe it to stubborn patients rather than leave them to seek it at animal feed supply stores. But then there are, of course, are those people who are advocating for the bill, seeking to silence physicians who recommend anything that resembles a second opinion on COVID or its treatment options. Here to talk more about the danger of this bill is Dr. Aaron Kheriaty. He is the author of The New Abnormal. He's been on the forefront of advocating for medical freedom throughout the pandemic. He was the director of the medical ethics program at UCI Health until he was fired for saying it's unethical to mandate people take the new COVID vaccine. Well, Aaron, welcome to the show. Tell us, is it ethical for lawmakers to tell doctors they have to stick to the government-sanctioned recommendations or lose their license? What is going on with this bill?
It's absolutely unethical, of course, and it's hard for me to think of a bill that's been introduced that would more radically undermine the practice of medicine, which is premised on the trust between a doctor and a patient. And what happens with this bill is basically you end up with a physician who has a gag order. You end up with physicians who cannot, in certain circumstances, say what they actually think. And it should be obvious to anyone, regardless of what you think about COVID policy or the government's recommendations on COVID treatment, it should be obvious that a physician with a gag order, a physician who cannot actually say what he or she thinks when asked a question about treatment from a patient, this is not a physician that you can trust, right? Patients want to know that if they ask their physician a question, including a question about COVID treatments, they'll get their doctor's honest opinion. Now, they may follow that advice. They may go seek a second opinion. They may, decide this doctor doesn't know what he's talking about. But no one wants to ask their doctor a question and have their doctor constrained and feeling like he or she needs to follow a script that's been pre-recorded by some government bureaucrat.
And I kind of envision, I imagine it happening that way. I imagine that this will force doctors to actually whip out a piece of paper and read a statement when a patient asks a question. Well, what do you think of this? And then they pull out the paper and say, this is what I need to say. Otherwise, I might lose my license.
In fact, I think that's exactly what physicians ought to do. Physicians ought to say, well, there is now a law in the books in the state of California that doesn't allow me to actually say what I think. So here's the government script that I am supposed to read to you. And if I don't follow this, follow this script, then my license may be at risk. And again, losing your license is the most severe punishment that you could inflict professionally on a physician. It's one thing to lose your job, as I did at the University of California. I can go and start a private practice. I can get a job working as a physician elsewhere. But if I lose my license, I lose my ability to practice.
Yeah, so if a doctor loses their license, is that nationwide? I mean, are they not able to practice medicine anywhere? Obviously, that would be devastating, even if you have to
Yeah.
move, but would they be able to practice anywhere else?
So the license is given state by state. So it's possible that the doctor could apply for another medical license in another state. But of course, as part of that application, you'll have to answer questions about what happened with your previous medical license. And if your medical license was revoked in California and you apply for a medical license in Oregon or Texas, those two states are going to scrutinize very closely why your license was revoked. So it could prove very difficult to get licensed in another state to practice medicine.
I would imagine, though, that there would be some of these red states where the governors would probably pass some sort of regulation, even there,
Yeah.
saying if a physician had lost their license because of this, then they should be allowed to come to our state and practice medicine. I would imagine that there would be there would be, for one, those types of protections that start to crop up. Two, I would imagine a lot of physicians. I mean, do you think that physicians, if this passes, well, it passed, but if Gavin Newsom actually signs this into law, which is today the day, is that what's happening? Is today the deadline?
Today is the last day that he has to veto it, as I understand.
So if he
And
doesn't, yeah.
he's showing no indication or sign that he's going to veto it. So,
Wow. So this would be, I think, another giant loss for the state of California. I would imagine a lot of
yep.
physicians might decide to leave the state rather than risk losing their license for practicing medicine. I think that they would say maybe it's time to pack up and move to a different state. Do you think it's going to have that effect?
Oh, I absolutely do think it's going to have that effect. That's a huge risk to take, as we've already talked about. So, better not to take that risk. Better to pack up and find greener pastures. So, what that means is that a lot of independent-minded physicians, including physicians that are on the vanguard of medical advances, are going to leave California, which ultimately, of course, harms patients. I mean, the real harm to this bill, the most serious harms to this bill, are not to physicians, as bad as those are. They're to patients. Patients are going to be the ones deprived of access to doctors who are, willing to think independently and challenge a consensus that they believe is false. This will also harm the advance of medical science, because science proceeds by hypothesis and conjecture and argumentation and refutation. You put a group of real scientists together in a room, they will argue endlessly about the findings of studies and the upshot of the evidence and so forth. If you look at the history of medicine proceeds and advances by challenging medical consensus. One of the ironies in this bill is that the bill cites 3 COVID statistics that have already been disproven. In the very text of the law itself, there are 3 things that the scientific consensus may have thought was true at the time the law was drafted, but since then they've either been seriously called into question or overturned. This is not unusual. This is what happens in science and medicine when you allow the free play of ideas and evidence and observation on the part of frontline physicians. Science and censorship are totally incompatible, and anyone who understands how science actually works, is going to understand that.
I mean, it seems like science is the question. I mean, that it starts with questioning. It starts with
That's
questioning
right.
what's the common practice or the common thinking and saying, I think there might be another way. I mean, that's how everything begins with it. So it is very dangerous, actually, to be saying to these physicians now, if you don't do and say and recommend what the government wants, which is bought off by big pharma. I mean, the thing is now is
Yeah.
with this, they're essentially saying you cannot go against what big pharma, which has lobbied these government officials, these politicians, and they're now making these recommendations. These politicians are
Yes.
making recommendations based on lobbying. And they're saying now to physicians, these are lawmakers who are not physicians, they're saying to physicians, you have to say what we want you to say based on our donors' or lose your license. I mean, physicians will not be able to talk about the dangers that we know about. I mean, there's a lot of what's been going on throughout this pandemic is shifting, constantly shifting, right? They were saying to us for the longest time, if you get the vaccine, you will not get COVID. That was not true. They said, if you get this vaccine, you will not get sick. That was not true. If you get this vaccine, you will not have any side effects, right? Except for nausea and sore arm. We know that that's not true. So, to try to get the government to even shift faster than the science, the government is very slow. It's not shifting faster than the science is shifting. The science is shifting very quickly, and government has yet to catch up. I mean, we still don't even allow unvaccinated foreign nationals into the country at this point. If you're Novak Djokovic, you can't travel into the United States, even though we know now that the vaccines do not stop the spread. That is absolute common knowledge at this point. So this seems really absurd. So he has today to veto this. You're saying he's not likely to veto it today, even with voices like Dr. Lena Wen saying this is a bad idea. What is going to happen next then if he signs it into law? When does it take effect?
So if he signs it into law, I believe it will take effect immediately. And I anticipate there are going to be First Amendment challenges. I'm preparing a First Amendment free speech challenge of my own. So there's a very good case to be made that this law violates the free speech constitutional rights of physicians in the state of California. And of course, the Constitution and constitutional rights are going to trump state law passed by a state legislature.
Right.
And so I anticipate that those challenges are going to wind their way through the courts. In the meantime, physicians will have this guillotine hanging over their head. But I have a hard time seeing that this law will remain standing ultimately at the end of the day. But of course, court challenges take a very long time. And so it would be much better for Governor Newsom, and I hope I'm wrong that he won't veto it. I certainly hope I'm wrong. But it would be much better for Governor Newsom to recognize that this is bad law and veto it.
Yeah. What is that? So what does this do immediately for a person like yourself? I mean, you're practicing medicine, you have a practice. You've been vocal against a lot of what's going on during the pandemic. Does this immediately silence you? I mean, you have a book coming out. I mean, does that hinder that? I mean, what is this going to do to you as a practicing physician in California and others who are like you who've been speaking out about everything that's gone on with the pandemic?
Well, this bill is not going to silence me. If anything, it's going to make me speak louder. I'm not going to flee the state of California immediately. I'm going to stay and fight. This is my home. The state of California belongs to the people of California. The people of California deserve good medicine. The people of California deserve a good medical system and good physicians. The people of California deserve to have science and medicine in their home state contribute to the advancement of the field.
But aren't you worried you would lose your license?
If that happens, I'll deal with it. But I think if good people, if good physicians do nothing, then these kinds of bad laws will continue to advance.
Well, and I think from my understanding of this bill is that you're still allowed to speak out publicly and on social media platforms. You just can't give recommendations to patients specifically. Is that, I mean, I'm sure that could be widely interpreted, though.
So that's right. The language of the law was tweaked in the course of it winding its way through committee. And supposedly the law now just has to do with advice given to patients. But where it gets a little bit muddy is if patients see something that I post in an article or a physician posts on social media, and they take that to be medical advice and follow it, it remains to be seen how that would be interpreted under the law. Is it just what I say directly face-to-face to a patient in an actual clinical setting, or are other forms of communication going to be construed as patient advice under the law? So it's a little muddy, and it's not clear how the courts would interpret the law in that regard.
I wonder what this is going to do to all of the FLCCC doctors who, are in the database that you can look
Yep.
up to get prescriptions and advice when if you contract COVID. I wonder if those physicians in the state of California are suddenly going to have to stop or else.
Uh, we'll see. We'll see what individual physicians decide to do. I imagine that the medical board has, and the government in California has a few people in mind, a few especially vocal critics of the government's COVID policies, and they may pick some of those to make a public example of. One of the chilling aspects of a law like this is it doesn't take very many physicians to actually come under scrutiny or discipline, or have their license revoked in order to silence all of the rest. You don't
Right.
need very many public examples, of someone getting their head lopped off for everyone else to fall in line and
Sure.
make sure that they toe the line.
Now, California is a crazy state, but do you know if there are laws like this that are looked at in other states,
Yeah.
other blue
I'm
states, I would
not
imagine?
I'm not aware of any other laws in any other blue states that are uh, similar to the AB 2098 in California. But a private association called the Federation of State Medical Boards, kind of the professional association for state medical boards, has actually recommended that laws like this be passed. Amazingly, this is clearly an organization that's been completely captured by big pharma. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, if this law goes into effect, that other blue states would look to the example of California and the recommendation of the Federation of State Medical Boards and start going down the same path.
I mean, just think about really. I think just like the snowball effect that this could create. I mean, I know that this is directed at COVID-19, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean we're not going to have another type of COVID-19, right? I mean, these guys are like chomping at the bit to have another sort of something. They try to get us with monkeypox, like everybody should fear this, right? So it's going to be constant, I think, over the next while that we're going to see things like this crop up. And if they're going to tell physicians you're not allowed to say anything other than the big pharma state sanctioned narrative, I mean, it's so that now no more talk about vitamins, no more talk about exercise, nutrition, even. I mean, things that, it's like, no, we've got this drug and that's the only thing you're allowed to talk about. That is what the government recommends. Do not give false hope by telling people to eat right and exercise. How dare you? I mean, where does this lead us? I mean, this seems to it's not just about COVID. People need to understand it. I think, interestingly, a person like Dr. Lena Wen, who has been, in my view, extremely tyrannical in her viewpoints during the COVID pandemic,
Yeah.
even she sees the danger in this and how this could backfire on physicians that are even on her side of the fence.
Yeah.
So this is really dangerous. Let's talk about your new book that's coming out. So you've got a new book, The New Abnormal. What's this about?
So the subtitle of the book is The Rise of the Biomedical Security State. And the book is about the kinds of things that you were just mentioning, in fact, Kim. So basically the things that were rolled out during the pandemic, the new social mechanisms of surveillance and control, the welding of public health with digital technologies of surveillance, things like vaccine passports, and the police powers of the state, what I've called the biomedical security state, was accelerated during the pandemic. And even though a lot of those policies have been walked back, there's not a lot of places using vaccine passports right now, for example. Um, those approaches to controlling and managing populations are ready to go and will be utilized during the next public declared state of
Yeah.
emergency. And in fact, this new form of governance that we've developed, which you alluded to a moment ago, will entail jumping from one declared emergency to the next in order for governors and presidents to, under the state of emergency, to take on emergency powers. The President of the United States gains 128 extra constitutional powers during the declared state of emergency, and basically, get things done that they otherwise couldn't have done during that emergency. And all kinds of issues, from climate change to the threat of computer viruses, have been reframed from environmental issues or tech-related issues to public health issues.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the language around climate change, it's all about public health now. And once something's declared a public health issue, it's a short step to declare it a public health crisis, an emergency that requires radical interventions to address. So serious people have put forward proposals to use rolling lockdowns to address climate change, for example. So the notion that these things are just going to go away is unfortunately not true. And my book is about basically where is this biomedical security state going next, and how do we recognize what's going on so that we can stand up against it.
I mean, they even
stop it.
They even said, the BLM movement was a public health crisis. I mean, they were saying, well,
That's
when
right.
all of these people were gathered together and everyone was like, wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to be social distancing and staying in our houses. And they're like, well, but this is a public health crisis that apparently trumps the COVID-19 pandemic public health crisis. So it is arbitrary. It seems like they can just declare anything from criminal justice reform, climate change, and viruses to everything is a public health crisis. It sounds like.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example, which I also mentioned in my book. It's, these public health, thousands of public health professionals signed this letter,
right,
declaring that in the kind of intersectional hierarchy of public health crises, we should allow these protests and these mass gatherings,
right,
during COVID when everyone else was locked down.
Yeah, it was it. Well, if you have the wrong political views, then you must stay locked down because the virus is coming to get you. But if you don't have those political views, then you could go ahead and go out there and protest in the streets. We have a bigger public health crisis that you can go ahead and battle. It was very, very, very bizarre. Aaron, thank you so much for being on the show. We'll definitely have you back to talk about that book. I can't wait to read it. It comes out in about a month, right?
That's right. It comes out November 1st. It's already available for pre-order. You can go on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, click the button, and order The New Abnormal. So yeah, I'm really excited about the book launch, and I hope readers are informed by the book.
Yeah, I was going to say excited, but then I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be excited reading this book. I think it's going to be alarming but informative, which is, I think everybody needs to understand what is probably going to end up being this new abnormal, sadly, that we're potentially marching into. So, Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kim.